Afternoon, everyone. I'm Mike Hilder. I'm with Hewlett Packard Enterprise, and have, I think, a topic that looks like a lot of you folks are interested in today. Actually working with Hali Reyes from CalWIN and myself, she helped us. So anyway, she helped us come up with the topic, and I think it's very pertinent right now with all of the different projects that are going on with the state. We've got a lot of projects that are going across multiple systems, and I think it's important to understand kind of a different way to do project management when you're impacting lots of systems. And so I'm going to introduce Dan Gonos. He's one of our chief technologists with Hewlett Packard Enterprise, and he's going to kind of give you some background about the topic, and then we'll move into a panel discussion about it. So Dan.
Thank you, Mike. So we have a panel of experts that we'll hear from a little bit later with various diverse backgrounds for projects in California. For those who do know me, this will be old news, but for those who don't know me, I've been delivering projects in California for almost 30 years, mostly in the health and human services space. As Mike said, I'm a chief technologist, but I'm also an HPE fellow. So what that means is that my day job, I look after systems from a delivery perspective, but at night I get to invent cool things. And one of the cool things you'll see in a couple of minutes is a story about how I built a pizza oven. So when you talk about collaboration and projects across boundaries, it brings up a number of questions. Who's in charge? Who drives the project? How do you accommodate all the different priorities? And how do you integrate all the different project schedules across all the entities? So y'all are here to hear from our panel experts on their experiences on the CalHERS project. If you look at over the last 40 years, you'll see multiple waves of technology. So, in the first wave, we moved from calculators to mainframes. So essentially the era of the mainframe, then transitioned into client server. So we started to see systems move from the big monolithic mainframes into servers and desktops and so on. And then what we found was, instead of taking floppy disks and sticking them into each of the PCs and moving things around, we had to interconnect all the systems. And so that brought on the next wave around the internet, connecting the internet of components and to solve business problems. And then finally, we're in this fourth wave where technology is everywhere, where it's mobile, social, cloud. And as you can see on the right-hand side, the thousands and thousands of things that occur every 10 seconds out there. Each of those waves required a fundamental shift in people, process, and technology to bridge that chasm, and different approaches to solving problems and different ways and relationships people had to interact with one another going through projects over time. So when I set out to build my pizza oven in my backyard, I was up in the foothills drinking some wine up at one of the wineries in the El Dorado foothills, and I came across this pizza oven. I said, "Wow, wouldn't that be so cool if I, built that and in my backyard and had great pizza at night?" So I had a need and a vision to build a pizza oven. Much like delivering and building systems, the need starts with an idea and it evolves over time, and that evolution changes over time as more and more information becomes available and as you interact with folks. So I figured I'd go down to Home Depot, get a couple bricks, some mortar, and put the pizza oven together, and then make some good pizza, and take me a couple weeks to do. So I said, before that, let me do a little bit of research and figure out what it takes to build a pizza oven. So what I found was that it took me 6 months research, collaborating with at least half a dozen builders across the globe with various different building materials. And it is so intricate and interesting that the yellow bricks that you see there are not regular bricks. They have 26% calcium aluminate in them, because the first time you fire up a pizza oven with regular bricks, it'll get up to temperature, you'll get a really great pizza out of it, but when it starts to cool down, the bricks will disintegrate and fall apart. And so you had to spend all that money to build one, pizza oven that created one pizza. Second thing was the shape of the dome of the oven. So it's an exact top of parabola. And the reason for that is that the force and pressure of both the heat and the weight of the bricks in the oven will, if it's not an exact parabola, the bottom bricks of the pizza oven will blow out the sides in your first firing. So the story goes, as you can see, we went from a vision to a plan to an implementation that doesn't look like the end product, but it still created great pizza in the end. And for those who have been to my house in the room, they can attest to the good pizza. So we're going to hear from our panel members around the CalHERS project and what it takes to collaborate across project boundaries. Many of you know the CalHERS history, and I'm pretty excited to hear from our panelists later. Just to briefly talk about the common challenges in multi-stakeholder projects. The laundry list can go on and on and on, but here's a list for you to take out. Whether it be the business needs, whether the requirements change, whether there's conflicting ideas of stakeholders, whether there's federal and state policy changes over the time through the project, whether all the pieces and parts fit together or not. If you look at all of these pieces put together, it really comes down to three main things. One, you either build the wrong thing, you get blindsided by technology because the parts don't fit together, or you failure to manage the project and its risks. And some folks will say that there's a fourth missing here, and it's a lack of adult supervision, but I'd like to keep it down to three. So if you look at a delivery framework for a project, there's really four key components of delivering projects. First of all, it starts with a strategy. Then you've got to design. Then you've got to transition that strategy and then operate for a period of time. And throughout those different dimensions and domains of this delivery framework, you have key aspects or processes that may or may not be involved in multi-jurisdiction projects. It could be business relationship management. How do you relate across the entities? Architecture and building the right pieces and making sure all the pieces fit together within the systems. How do you develop it at the same time you're trying to meet your own business needs? And how do you keep things running after things are deployed? So from a strategy dimension, each of these areas have your basic methods and your enhanced methods. So no matter whether you're delivering a multi-jurisdiction project or an internal project, you still have to do the basics, right? You still have to manage the demand, you still have to manage your portfolio of work, you still have to evaluate change to your systems, you still have to manage risks, and you still have to manage your suppliers. But when you're dealing with multiple organizations, there's some key methods that need specific focus and tailoring specific to that collaboration across boundaries. One is around business relationship management. If y'all were in a session earlier, talked a little bit about relationship management. Finance, so financial management. Multi-collaboration projects are going to cost more because you have more people, more moving parts, and more competing priorities going forward. So requirements are key. So if you don't know where you're going, how do you know you're going to get there? Change, how do you manage not only the change to the shared project, but how do you manage that change while you have other stuff going on in your own world? And we'll hear a little bit from one of the panelists on that topic earlier. And how do you build the strategy that allows you to manage those issues internally while at the same time managing those external stakeholders? So some of the key themes here is someone has to be in charge both from a business and technical perspective. So somebody's got to be able to make the call and make the call in the best interest of all of the stakeholders. You've got to establish clear and concise goals and objectives and solicit your input from the stakeholders early and often throughout the project lifecycle. Documenting baseline requirements is key. Like I said, if you don't know where you're going, how do you know when you get there? You got to rigorously manage them, and you got to plan on communication. Communication at the lowest levels and communication at the highest levels. As we move from strategy into design, again, we still have some basic methods. You still have to keep your systems available. You still have to comply with regulations. You still have to design and coordinate those design among your teams. You got to plan for business continuity. You got to deal with security. You got to deal with the catalog of capabilities that you're going to deploy in your system, and the service qualities, those service levels that keep your systems and your users happy. But on the enhanced side, when you're dealing with multi-jurisdictional projects, architecture management becomes key. Because if the architecture components can't talk to one another, or the building blocks can't communicate or fit together, it's a recipe for disaster. Capacity is an important thing, because now when you're thinking about capacity in your own world, you now have to rely on other individuals. And a backup in another system may create a backup into your system. You need to build firewalls into the solutions to prevent problems. Two other key areas is around review boards. How do you make sure that your developers and your development teams are basically building to architectural specifications that you know are going to fit together? And technical launches, those are at looking at project key technical risks and identifying and addressing those key technical risks early and often. So in other words, base your technology selections based on established enterprise architecture, provide clear separation of components so that if one fails, your entire system doesn't fail, and have a well-defined, ruthless focus on how those pieces and parts fit together. As we move from design into a build, there's only really one basic method that still has to stay in place. That's around knowledge management, being able to communicate design artifacts and communicate what we're delivering in the solution going forward. In the enhanced side, you now have to deal with changes in your application development lifecycle, some key components in knowledge management that extend beyond your internal stakeholders to other stakeholders to ingest knowledge into your environment. A well thought out release and deployment management process, because now you're relying on releases from external entities that may impact the delivery of your systems going forward. Having key focus on asset and configuration management, knowing what the pieces are, what versions of them are deployed in what environments, and validation and testing becomes key. And validation and testing goes beyond that, whereas you may run into situations where your components are making it through the system test lifecycle, where other ones are behind in the development lifecycle. So what types of capabilities do you build in to continue your testing processes while other pieces and parts of the system are going forward? Multivariant development. So this is around having multiple releases in place simultaneously, both in the collaborative system as well as your internal system. Automating builds and deploys. You cannot rely on folks doing manual builds and deploy when you have too many components in place going on simultaneously. You've got to have a ruthless focus on test data management and focus on component integration testing. Starting to build in pieces into the development lifecycle where you can test early and often while other things are going on in the environment that's being built outside of you. And then doing field acceptance testing, that is smoke and parallel testing in your production environment prior to going live. So after you get through all that strategy and all that design and all of that build, then you got to keep the things operational. So from a basic method perspective, you still got to deal with access management, application management, deal with the facilities, the data centers, and the requests around that. But in the enhanced methods, there are three key areas around event management, incident management, problem management. You will see significant changes in those three areas from a support model. You will need to put in more places, cross-organizational support to know who is responsible for what, where, and when, and why. Being able to instrument into your systems to identify responsibilities and assign those capabilities to those individual organizations and have a holistic view around problem management and incident management across that entire ecosystem. So with that, I'll turn it over to Hali, and let's hear from the panelists across those 4 project delivery domains.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate that. Can you hear me okay? It's not that big of a room, so probably just hear my street voice. So my name's Hali Reyes, and I work on the CalWIN project. Many familiar faces out there. Thank you for coming. It's really great to see you. For those of you who went to the keynote speaker this morning, you did hear about how quickly the CalHERS project was delivered. And it was a monumental feat, and it was a feat that was accomplished by many, many organizations and individuals who committed a lot of time and effort to make it as successful as we see it today. Through that, though, we've learned a lot of lessons, and that's what our panelists are all about this afternoon, because I really think it's important for us to draw from experiences and through the next series of events, learn from that. So I'd like to introduce our distinguished panelists today. First, we have James Duckens, who's the director for CalHERS. And we have Faye Collier. She is from Department of Healthcare Services, which is one of the chief stakeholders, and she leads one of our governance committees that I happen to be a member of. And then we have Michael Sylvester. Michael is from Los Angeles County, and he leads the social services or the welfare system for that county, and remarkably, they serve about 30% of the state of California. So big endeavor, huge job, and by the way, that's not all that Michael does. Then we have Christie Hendren, who is our service delivery manager on the CalWIN project. So she's the one that ensures that when we deliver CalWIN code with CalHERS code, that it all works as it should. And I have a few seed questions for our panelists to kind of get the ball rolling, and we'll just kind of work our way down the line. But I do encourage you to participate in the conversation, because we don't learn unless we ask questions, and we just kind of, we're thinking of the various areas that you might want to hear about. So James, we're going to start with you. As the project director, what do you find to be the most challenging feature of your role, knowing that you have so many stakeholders to answer to and so many individual systems that you impact?
You know, I was wondering why this seat was open. I get to answer the question first. So thank you, Hali. So when you told me what the question was going to be last night,
Plenty of time.
I could write a whole, several pages of here's all the challenges with this project. But so I'll just sort of back up and say these things. Number one, Mike, our Undersecretary, Health and Human Services Agency, Mike Wilkening, he did say this morning project got delivered in 15 months, which is, if you've been around California, you know that's really unheard of to do. But he did say with that, so there's kind of good when you do like that. There's challenges with that. Number one, you can't get all the functionality and all the things in that everybody wants right then. And so the challenges is how do you do that? So I just wrote down my two big challenges: meeting the sponsor, partner, stakeholders' expectation, and then the second one is managing the partners and sponsors and stakeholders' expectations, because you have to manage those expectations, because you can't do everything at once. And what we've tried to do with this is we have I think what is a maturing project management governance process in place right now. And I will just say this: I've been on the project this project since last June, so a little over a year and a half. And well, not quite a year and a half, but what I'll say is the project was up and running before I got here, so it was successful, and all you all did the project team, some of my team members are out there, they all did a heroic job right from the very beginning, including Sauce, folks like that, to get this up and running. And so my challenge is to make sure that I don't let any balls drop, and I keep the project as successful as it has been so far. And I think we're doing that. Our governance project process is in place so that we can make sure that we communicate. I went to Kathy Gleeks, who's sitting up in front. I went to her presentation earlier this morning, and one of her messages were communicate, communicate, communicate. So really, the technical things will work themselves out, and usually that's not the issue. The issue is the communication. And when you have so many different stakeholders, we have two sponsors, one of them sitting next to me, DHCS in Cover California, who this project reports to as a part of the project portfolio of OSI. And then we have the various stakeholders in the SAWs. We have our partners, Fed partners that we hook up with the hub with. We also interface with EDD and FTB. So we have a lot of interfaces and a lot of partners, a lot of stakeholders. And in addition to that, we have a lot of advocates that want this functionality that they can put in the beginning when we initiate it. How does that all get in? And so we try and manage that with the what we call 24-month roadmap. It has, at a high level, the initiatives that we're planning to address for the year, and it kind of sets people's expectations, and then managing expectations, and then bringing them into the process to help us get there.
Great.
And so I'll stop right there and answer questions and add on as the panel goes.
Okay, great. So we're gonna move through the panel once, and then we'll open it up for questions. So Faye, you're next.
Okay.
So as the chair for one of our leadership governance committees that has been formed over time, what do you find to be some of the most valuable lessons learned through that process that we can apply to future multi-jurisdictional or collaborative projects such as CalHER's?
Thank you, Hali. So again, thank you everyone for having us here. And again, my name is Faye Collier, and I'm with the Department of Healthcare Services. And Department of Healthcare Services is one of the sponsors on the CalHER's project in the CalHER's system. And specifically, it's to serve the Medi-Cal recipients of California. And as you all may know, or at least have heard through, there's about 14 million individuals that are dependent on that health care. And as well as on what we call the Cover California side, where individuals can actually purchase health plans. And all of that is through the CalHER system. And so it's the intent is to have no wrong door. So when someone goes into either the CalHER's system or through that portal, or as well as through the SAWs and our business partners, it's a way of allowing the individual and the families to get the necessary health care, right? And as you all heard this morning, as well as what James had highlighted as well, is that the system was stood up at a very rapid rate. And of course, the initial intent is to take care of the Cover California initiatives first, not to say that the Medi-Cal side was second backseat, but definitely the focus is to stand up that environment and taking care of all of those that don't have health care that needs to be purchasing the health care. And through the SAWs and our business partners at the county level, there's already that mechanism. But once you stand up something, it doesn't mean that it's going to run smoothly. And in such a quick, rapid rate, there's going to be a lot of pain points and a lot of voices that needs to be heard. And I think one of the lessons learned as the project started to stabilize was a governance structure. And as the project started, there was the executive steering committee. As with any project, there's always the establishment of that executive committee structure. But what about the lower level? How is the message gets downward, as well as in, I would say, issues or escalation going upward, right? So there has to be, and it recognized through a quality assurance process, they investigated and analyzed the need for multiple layers. And so aside from the executive steering committee, they established, the project itself established a project steering committee, and then down to the program coordination committee, which is the committee that Hali has been highlighting. And that's the committee that I chair. as one of the sponsors. So I'm technically a co-chair, although I've been wearing that hat a lot. Only our Cover California folks have been very focused, especially as you all heard this morning. Open enrollment starts today. So a lot of times I seem to be carrying that lift. But that is a role that I truly cherish. And I not only get a chance to really work with individuals like Hali, but James Duckens, but also our vendors, as well as other business partners, our county partners, our CWDA, which is the County Welfare Directors Association, understanding the end user through their eyes and through their voice, it's going to be very important. I mean, as part of being what I would say lessons learned, is to actually understand it not only from a sponsor level as to what objectives and goals that we need to achieve, but also down to the county eligibility worker level, down to the actual consumer who's going to come through the portal. What kind of system are they seeing? What kind of interaction are they looking for so that they can go through the process and utilize the system and actually go, wow, that was easy. At least that's what we hope that they will say. But the end goal is really kind of putting that into perspective. As I chair the committee, that's what's in my head. That's what's in my heart in order to really make sure that each of the objectives, not only our departments, but also through the different layers that it has to go through, down to our end users. That's what it's important. And then in order to do that, I have to be, as a chair, listen with my heart. And so through very strong personalities within any committee, there's always going to be points and passion that's behind everything. And so how do you listen and actually figure out what is the real issue? And that's going to be the key. So that is one of the things I've learned, and I hope that I serve the committee well through that process. And sometimes when the conversation and points are being raised and discussed through, there will be so many voices that you may just have to kind of pause someone. And I know the group is very familiar with my statement, let's put a pin in it. And so that is, again, the piece that's really important, not being judgmental, but truly listen with your heart. So, thank you, Holly.
Thanks, Faye. Okay, so we're going to move on to Michael, who had a particularly interesting challenge. During the rollout of CalHears, he also was in the development and delivery of a brand new system within his county LRS. So he had multiple things going on. I would say a juggling act extraordinaire. I'd like you to talk a little bit about how did you manage some of the biggest challenges with going live with both of these systems, either development and go live or go live and maintaining, really is what ended up happening through the change cycle, as well as configuration management. All those components that keep everything connected and running had to have been particularly challenging for you.
Yes, this is Mike Sylvester, LA County. Just to set some context, when CalHears was effectively rolling out at the early stages, we were still running on our legacy system in Los Angeles County for eligibility, which is known as LEADER, which is a COBOL power builder based system. We also have some other legacy systems that were running at the time for welfare to work, and that's an ADA-based system. And then we had a mapper system. Anybody who's familiar with technology knows these things are dated. That was for our welfare to work for the GR population. So we had a number of systems that were set to be replaced with a more modern system, and we had already launched that particular project at the time that ACA was coming in. So we were in the requirements and design and development various phases of what was going to be the LRS, or the replacement system for all those legacy systems. And ACA was coming in, and CalHears was coming in on that accelerated path that was talked about ahead of time, and dates were firm. And they were driven by, financial incentives. They were driven by necessities that you couldn't push or skirt or change. So we had to adapt to that. We had to figure out, okay, this is a train, it's going down the station, down the tracks, but we also have a train going down the tracks for us as well, because our Board of Supervisors isn't going to let us just basically delay replacing these legacy systems, so we need to manage both of these at the same time. So what we did was we looked at our resources. We tried to find as many places in the project where we could create common touch points and to ensure that we weren't doing the work twice anywhere in the project. So where we had to work with CalHERS on policy development that came in that had to be developed into the SAWS side of it, and again, I'm going to have to put a little bit of context behind this, is that CalHERS was running eligibility determination, but it actually communicates with the welfare eligibility system, so they actually they're symbiotic, they have to work together. So as we're setting up that interface and making sure that we know exactly how to treat the cases in our legacy system for the Medi-Cal cases, we had to also be working in the design phases for our replacement system and using the same sessions so that we could have the same policy design apply to the new system. Now, that wasn't at the architecture level, but it was at least at the policy level that we weren't working policy in two different ways. Then we had to step through and then find out what kind of concessions we need to do in the legacy systems versus the new system to make sure that it would effectively work the same way, because we were going to be rolling out on legacy and then rolling out in our replacement system not too far afterward. So our teams were effectively the same team. So we'd use the same designers, the same business analysts, to inform our legacy system as we built that, and that would go right into our design for our replacement system project. We're housed in the same floor. We were able to, if I was looking at things that we did really well, I think we didn't repeat any of that. We didn't actually end up having redesigns based specifically off of any kind of derivation from our legacy to our replacement system. It was extremely challenging. We were working with a project that was, breaking ground themselves, new ground themselves in terms of their own governance and working through the different governance components of that. I think one of the things that we had to focus on as well was trying to build strong connections within the CalHERS team, within the OSI team, within DHCS, so that we could see the full picture, because it wasn't good enough to just look at our piece of it. Because that's the initial starting point, is everybody from a risk standpoint says, okay, what's our piece and how do we do that? We had to go further because the risk was too high for us to have both those projects going at the same time and not know what the end result and outcome needed to be, all the way from SAWS all the way through CalHERS and back. So we needed to invest our staff in design sessions and looking at all aspects of it so that we could then bring that back to the team. I thought that was really effective. I thought it created a lot of good conversation. I thought it actually resulted in identifying things that, even though we weren't able to address on an accelerated schedule, we were aware of them, and we were able to work with the CalHERS project to make sure that they were targeted, that they were laid out, and that we had mitigation plans in place. So we had to come up on a legacy system that we were then going to move off of. And I mean, that's not how you want to do these projects. You don't want to have to build and then move. But we didn't throw away, because we used all the design efforts, all the requirements efforts, all to roll over to the new system as well. And I thought that was part of our success with the LRS transition, was we were able to not lose schedule with our replacement system at the same time as being able to come up live and support the ACA goal, and to make sure that there was no delays in actually coming up and taking advantage of the federal funding that was associated with that.
Great, thank you, Michael. Okay, Christy, it must be you. So having been on the CalWIN project, which is one of the 3 SAWS projects, and being responsible for delivering on the CalWIN or the welfare side, when this new entity came in, how much of a disruption was that in our organization when it comes to delivery of change, development of change, delivery of change, testing, all of the cycles that were so well defined prior to this relationship? What were the changes, or what sort of metamorphosis have we gone through?
Well, the CalWIN application has been around for many years, as everybody knows. And we have multiple, more than a dozen interfaces already. And we have those pretty stable, and we don't do a lot of change in those systems. So when the CalHERS interface came along and this new system is standing up, they are building their own environments and their own system already. And then we're having to interface to this brand new system and very dependent on it. So it's not just that we have to get data or send data, which is a one-way interface like we do on a lot of ours, but we are dependent on the data that is returned. So that dependency is critical when figuring out how do we build our change processes, our change environments, and our overall strategies on development. So some of the things that we had to do from a technical perspective is to build new environments that were dedicated to this interface. We have multiple changes, major releases that go in on multiple times a year to our counties, and these needed to be completely dependent on the CalHERS changes going in as well. So we had to separate our major releases from the releases that were going to go in with CalHERS. We did not want that dependencies with the other changes that were going to impact our counties. So we had to stand up not just one environment, but you have to do it through the whole life cycle of development. So you have a development environment, a system test environment, a UAT, and also an integration testing environment. So all of those different environments had to be established. In addition to that, we had to change some of our configuration management, which is the versioning control of our applications, so that we could complete a separate modules away from our major releases. And those were established in the different environments. So we've never had to do that with any of our other types of interfaces. We usually just integrate those into, if there's changes into those interfaces, into our regular major releases. But due to the large volume and dependency of the CalHERS application, we had to completely separate out those pieces of code so that they were not dependent on our major releases and impact our counties with the other changes. We had to build out new teams. We had specialized people that had to go to the sessions to identify the requirements that were going to be for our system, as well as our testers and our county support as well. So we had to relay the communication of the CalHERS impact to our system down to our counties so that they would understand how that worked together as well. So there was just a lot of different changes within our application.
Okay, good. Thanks, Christy. So I think did I get the 5-minute sign? I don't know. Okay, so just a reminder, I have a job to do apparently. If you could fill out your survey and put great things about this session, that would be awesome. And we do have a few minutes left for additional questions from the audience. Do speak up. There are enough of you. Okay, way in the back. Brave soul.
So the name of our session is Collaborating Across Boundaries. And so I wondered, what do you see as a boundary in your book? What do you see as, do you think of a boundary as a technology boundary, a system versus system, or an organization? What were the boundaries that you had to collaborate across?
Okay, Michael's going to take the question.
Since I'm from LA, there's lots of boundaries, even within our county, the second largest county in the country. They're organizational boundaries for the most part. Those are the things that become inhibitors if you can't determine how you're going to be able to work through them in recognizing them. First thing is to actually recognize where they are, what kind of challenges they pose, and you have to have strategies on how you can actually overcome that and build it into your governance process. And I think we did do that. I mean, we have an evolving governance process that's continuing with CalHERS to make improvements on how we communicate across teams, because there's a lot of people working diligently and aggressively at timelines that need to kind of know what the other folks are doing. And so I think James mentioned about a 24-month roadmap. That was one effort to try to cross boundaries between all the different development teams to let them see what's on the scope and horizon related to the ACA effort and who was doing what pieces and what timeframes. And I think that was, that was very helpful in sort of getting something tangible on a sheet of paper that can get organizations talking a little bit more than just what conference calls are covering. And I think anytime we can introduce instruments like that, I think it facilitates dialogue. It brings issues that may not be at the surface up to the surface so that they can be handled. I'd much rather know about the issue and resolve it than to let it sit there and cook and then find out later on when you can't do anything about it. So I think the boundaries really are organizational boundaries, and how do you get past the bureaucracy that's tied into sort of creating those firm structures?
Question back there and then here.
I was wondering how you were able to overcome the competing priorities of the various organizations and within those boundaries. And for the organizations that weren't able to get their priorities risen up, how are you able to work within those challenges?
Right. Who would like to take that?
I can start. And so, as far as competing priorities, depending on which level you're at, there's definitely going to be internal competing priorities as well as external. So, as a sponsor, as an example, we get pressure from the legislatures, the federal government. Those are the boundaries that we work with, but as well as the advocates that maybe perhaps out there that will have very loud voices that knocks on the doors of our legislature, right? So in that sense, those are some of the pressures that we have to take into consideration as far as evaluating those priorities. As far as the committee that we were speaking to earlier, that's where, by gathering all the right entities together that have the ability to not only understand the internal struggles within their own organization, but also be able to be that decision maker. And it starts at a different level, and as I mentioned earlier, most of the folks, or at least what we're familiar from a project, is the executive steering. But if you have different layers, you're trying to manage it at the lowest level possible. You're managing those priorities as well at the lowest level possible. And then when it can't be, then you elevate it up to the next level, and then so on and so forth. And I think by CalHERS project, through the growing pains, I think by having that structure, it's allowing everyone not only to be at the table, understanding all of each other's challenges and priorities, internal as well as external, and then actually having the opportunity to talk it through and be open about it. And then if we can't resolve or come to consensus, then it gets elevated up to the next level.
And
With
if
the
I
right
may,
information.
I'm sorry, Faye.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Well, we're getting the high sign
Oh.
over here, and we're happy to stay a little bit longer to kind of cap this off. But if I may get at the essence of what I think I might be hearing, is there are other programs out there beyond Medi-Cal and the other clients that the portal is serving. And so you heard from Christi, what we did at CalWIN, and I think it's similar at C4 in LA, if I can speak for you, is we split it apart, right? So we're still delivering on all of our other programs, and then we have a separate track delivery for CalHERS. And it's really all about resources, planning, and time at the SAWS level at that point. Once we understand what we're doing at CalHERS, and we have our own pot of money for CalHERS changes, which is not competing with your other program dollars. So you're not losing in terms of the delivery cycle from our perspective. And Michael, I don't know if you have something to add there.
Yeah, and I think that you guys covered the priorities down within the teams really well, and I wanted just to elevate across priorities across the team. because I think we have two good examples of that, and it is about awareness of one another. So we were really clearly sharing project schedules between CalHERS and LRS at the time, because they both have a movable object somewhere in there, and then some objects are movable. And the more we're aware of one another and what are kind of those real sticking points and which ones we have flexibility, we have the ability to help one another. And we did that on two separate occasions where between the CalHERS and the LRS project, we shared dates where we were able to move or they were able to move a release so that way we weren't competing and dropping code all at the same time in both of our projects and increasing the risk for both of us at the same time. So we found two separate times, and that was because of awareness of our schedules and being able to elevate it up to the right level who could make those kind of decisions. And it turned out to be a win-win in both occasions where both teams actually benefited from that time shift.
Great, thank you. I don't know if we're gonna get kicked out. They're not opening the door, so that's good. You had a question?
This is primarily for James. I'd be interested if you could expand a little bit on the managing the expectations of your stakeholders and any lessons that you learned specifically of things to do or not do in attempting to manage those expectations.
Well, I think we already kind of mentioned the governance structure that we have to manage expectations. So that roadmap that we talked about earlier is really informed by the priorities that the sponsors have. And so we have a process that we built over time to try and address those priorities. We have the various levels that we try and manage. We have the Executive Steering Committee, we have the Program Coordination Committee, we have the SOS Integration Committee, and then on a weekly basis, we have our project directors meeting where we have all the right people in the room to kind of help us say, here's what we're working on today, here's our priorities, and here's how, this is what we plan to do. And then we escalate things and resolve them at the proper level. With that roadmap and the things that get populated there, we have a process that we go through a summit meeting. So we have a summit meeting every month to bring in initiatives, to talk about how we break those down into change requests. And then we talk about, do we have the resources and the time and where those can drop on the roadmap and whether or not we can do them if we have the right resources to do them. So we have a process of managing that way. It's kind of like a complex project. But we
Just a little
manage it. But I think we do a fairly good job. There's a much better, I'm sure we can do much better over time, but overall, I think the process is working and we're maturing those governance processes, like Michael said, gave us some really good examples of how we're using that to our advantage right now.
So to add on to your point about managing expectations, Rob, one of the things I think where the sponsor role really comes into play is to really understanding the focus that we need to be at the project. And as you know, I live 70% of my time at CalHERS. So as far as how that expectation is managed, is that James walks over to my office and I walk over to his. And that is one way of opening up that dialogue. And then if there's certain expectations, then we can talk that through. And it really is just kind of going back to what was shared, not only by Mike, about the communication, but also at an earlier session that I attended as well, is that open dialogue. Is actually being at each other's, understanding what is the give and take, and the negotiation that's maybe going hand in hand.
I think we're modeling after a lot of what you've done for the men's monitoring.
That's good. I mean,
So
if
it's
anybody
like
can
I'm
get
gonna
started
live there as
earlier,
well,
that's better.
75% of the time.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah, the boundaries are truly not technical. It's those organizational boundaries that we have to work through.
Absolutely.
So.
Well, let's give our panelists a hand. Thank you very much for being here. Really appreciate your time, and thank you all for attending. Enjoy the rest of the day.